Hello, how are you this evening? And welcome to Little City TV. Each week we take an insightful look into the world of autism and what we can do as parents, family members, and friends to improve the lives of people who are affected by this disability. Well, in case you're wondering where your regular host Lisa Reyes is right now, well, she's on a well-deserved honeymoon with her fiance. And we wish them the best of luck, of course, and a wonderful life together. She won't be back here next week. In fact, I will be subbing again for her. But in a couple of weeks, she will be back into this seat and to take your calls and to host this show. Our very special guest tonight is Dr. Frederica Theus. She is a member of the talented group of staff at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This team at UIC is doing very exciting teaching and research, including diagnostic evaluations and intervention on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Dr. Theus is a licensed clinical psychologist and coordinator of the Child and Adolescent Diagnostic and Family Support Program at UIC. She has earned a bachelor's degree in speech communicative disorders from Northwestern University and a master's in learning disabilities from also at Northwestern. She also has a doctorate in psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at Argosy University. Dr. Theus has licensed accreditations in clinical psychology and learning disabilities and is a certified consultant in relationship development intervention. She is a member of the Autism Society of America and sits on the Professional Advisory Committee for the Autism Society of Illinois. In addition, Dr. Theus is a member of the Advisory Committee for the Chicago Autism Connection and the ARC of Illinois Family to Family Health Information and Education Center. Whew. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Frederica Theus. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And as a guest, you've got very exciting activities, of course, that you've been involved in and great pursuits and, of course, a great study. But when we start talking about autism, very few of us really know what autism really is. What is it?
Well, it is a neurological disorder. It is brain-based. There are still much that we are learning about autism, but that is the one thing that we know, that it is neurological, and brain scans have shown that. And right now we don't really know the causes completely. We know, again, that there may be some genetic factors. Research is looking into environmental factors, but most likely we're looking at a combination of many factors that are coming together.
And it's been so difficult to diagnose over the years. Mm-hmm. It's getting a little bit better now, as I understand it.
I think it is. I think we have made a lot of progress, and as most people have heard, we're looking at higher numbers than we have in the past. For many years, we talked about 1 in 150. More recently, now we're really looking at 1 in 110, and some studies are even showing increased incidence in that. So I think we are getting better. Many of those children who we were diagnosing with other types of developmental disabilities or missing completely, we now are identifying them, I think, appropriately. But even still, it does seem like there are increases.
Were there many children then in that situation just simply got misdiagnosed?
I believe so. I think in some cases, many children who had what might be considered to be higher functioning disorders on the spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, high functioning autism, sometimes were being identified as having ADHD, behavior disorders, learning disabilities. Those may have been correct co-occurring disorders in some cases. In other cases, may not have been the correct diagnoses. In other cases, children were being diagnosed as having intellectual disabilities, and the autism was being missed completely.
Now, we hear about there being this spectrum in regard to autism. What exactly is the autism spectrum, and how is it determined?
Well, it is a range, and I think it's very important to always keep in mind, as many families already know, that no two children with autism are alike. Every one is an individual, And you can have quite a wide range, from children who have no language, no verbal language, and are completely nonverbal, to individuals who can have quite a bit of language and very high vocabularies, for example. But what is in common is the social interaction piece and the reciprocity. So an individual who has high-functioning autism or Asperger's, who may have a very expansive vocabulary, may still have difficulties in having a true back and forth conversation. So there can be quite a range, and that can be quite confusing, I think, for parents getting a diagnosis to try to understand.
When you have a child, particularly if you have a child who has in fact a large vocabulary or broad range of vocabulary and phrases, and yet they are still diagnosed as autistic. And I'm sure it throws a lot of parents off. I'm recalling hearing a conversation, an interview with Holly Robinson Peete recently, and of course about their child. Yeah. And you just don't want to believe, first of all, as a parent, that it's my child. And then once it's discovered, what do I do? Yeah. You know, a lot of folks, a lot of parents whose children are facing, this disability are just almost dumbfounded as to what to do with it now. Yes. And how are you helping those parents understand that there is an avenue for help?
We do try to point them in directions of agencies that can help with them. Every parent is different. I've seen such a range. I've heard some parents tell me that they needed to have a week or a month where they cried, and then after that month they were mobilized and energized, and they never looked back, and they just kept going forward. Other parents immediately will spring into action upon hearing the diagnoses. But for each family, I think it is important to really to seek out support and community because it's an amazing adjustment that they must go through.
Well, we have a caller. We expect to have a lot of calls tonight on this particular issue. Let's go to our caller right now. Caller, you're on the line.
Hi. If you suspect your child has autism or some spectrum of it, what's the first steps that you should take as a parent?
Yes, and kind of piggybacking off of what you just asked is perfect. I think, first of all, in some cases, seeking out your pediatrician. And that may have been he or she may have been someone who has helped you to reach that conclusion that it's time to really explore the issue through a screening in the office. During your regular visit, it may have come up. In some cases, that is not true, and we have many parents who have said that they have been the ones really who have brought it to their pediatrician. But hopefully he or she can then help you to identify resources in your area for a comprehensive evaluation, which is a very important first step to determine whether or not autism is the correct diagnosis. If your child is in school, parents will often take that step first and talk to school personnel about getting evaluated through the school system, which is another avenue. There are some families who have tried both those routes and still have not been able to get the assistance they need and have sought their own evaluations through some of the many agencies that are out there. There are agencies such as Autism Speaks that can give you information on where to go in your area. Family Resource Center on Disabilities, ARC of Illinois, and there are many others. I don't mean to leave anyone out, but those are some of the agencies where you can look to find out in your area, and given whatever the insurance or payment situation is, who might be the best where might be the best place to get an evaluation, because you do want to make sure you are getting a comprehensive evaluation from clinicians who are trained to make an autism spectrum diagnosis.
A lot of parents, they want to help their child, obviously, but then they look at the staggering cost, and I heard Holly talking about that as well, that the cost can just be almost prohibitive in the minds of many parents who really do want to help, but they seem almost, bound up by the cost factor. Should they be? Are there avenues? You mentioned insurance. Some insurance, I'm sure, will pay. They've now accepted this. as a condition for which they will pay benefits.
Right. And it is an enormous problem. There are many families who are without insurance completely, and the resources are minimal. And that is, I think, one of the most frustrating parts of my work, is to see families struggling to find the resources for their children, and it is a huge obstacle. The school is one avenue, and we see families really work very closely with schools to get as many resources as they can and services through the school. But the families really do have to be bloodhounds, in terms of seeking out the interventions and the services, and it is quite difficult.
How can you make it, these agencies, make it easier for parents to access that kind of benefit?
Well, I think some of the agencies I mentioned earlier have really helped in terms of being referral services because Chicago is so massive. The Chicagoland area is so huge. It can be very overwhelming to just try to find resources, even if you have the means to pay. So I think that is a help to have some agencies out there that's what they do, is to be a resource and referral center. So to help point the people in the right direction, that's part of it. And I think all of us being as active with our legislatures as possible to let them know that there is this need that's out there. The PUNS registration is also something that's important. Prioritization of urgency of needs is a registration that families can do once they're diagnosed with, it can be autism or any other type of developmental disability. That is a registration for families so that the state of Illinois can identify how many people and the ages of the individuals who have disabilities, and to help them to qualify for a waiver based on the urgency of their needs. So that is one avenue. It doesn't cover everything, and it certainly doesn't help everyone, but because it is based on the urgency of needs. But that is something we do encourage families to register for, because it does open up some doors.
Right. So in your work with the Department of Disability and Human Development at the University of Illinois, Chicago, what advice can you draw from your research experience that you can pass along to parents who have children with autism and may be watching?
Well, I think one thing that we may have touched on even a little bit earlier is the importance of reaching out to the community, the autism community. And we see families in a range of circumstances. Some have extremely strong family supports and friends who are a network for them. We also see quite the opposite, unfortunately, of parents, often a single mom who feels very isolated and alone. Even when you do have that strong family support, what I hear over and over again is the importance of reaching out to other parents who have children who are on the spectrum. And certainly no two people can have the same experience. No one can know exactly how you feel or what your experience is, but I've just heard that over and over about.
There are some common threads, I would imagine, though, for any parent, for any child, no matter what degree of this disability that child may have. So, but I could see that there would be tremendous value in parents networking either through the internet and sites that they've established on their own, to link themselves together with other parents of autistic children. And I could see where that would be a tremendous benefit.
Well, and as a
common commiseration,
That's right. And as a professional, certainly we try to be as knowledgeable as we can about the resources that are there. But the parents are the ones who are out there living it, and are finding the resources and are working the system and can really share that experience with other parents. And only another parent can really commiserate in the same way in terms of what it is like to hear that diagnosis. And as you said, there are parent support groups out there. The Chicagoland Autism Connection, which I'm involved with, has a parent support group that is excellent, where you can go to monthly meetings, but then there are also avenues of, if you don't want to, for whatever reason, go to a meeting or are not able to go to a meeting through the internet, through chat groups and Yahoo groups, and to be able to connect and get information in that way as well.
I think that as much as we can in terms of putting this network together, whether it's agencies or researchers or parents, I think that it can only help the situation. We have another caller. Caller, what's your question, please?
Yes. From your research, have there been any major breakthroughs recently with treating autism?
There are so many different types of interventions out there, and I wouldn't say major breakthroughs in terms of one specific type of intervention, but there are many that are out there, and we are getting more and more information, and more people are doing research in terms of outcomes, which is so important. To look at some interventions have been around for a very long time, like ABA. Others are newer in terms of RDI, which I'm involved with, and it's been about a decade, which is still a little while. I think what's very important is to really find out information about the interventions. Again, Autism Speaks has a publication or a manual that you can download called 100 Days Kit, that gives lots of information about the diagnoses, but it's just a nice resource in terms of the types of interventions that are out there. And I always like to stress that, just as we said before, no two children, no two individuals with autism are exactly alike, and an intervention that may be right for one individual may not be a good fit for your child or your family. So really finding out from other parents who have done it and finding out what information is out there about it and making some decisions about if it sounds like it's right for you and your family.
Well, I'm sure that's... now, they call autism a mysterious disorder, hence the puzzle piece which it uses as its national symbol. I know that you're just hypothesizing, but do you have any personal theories on the potential causes of some of these forms of autism?
I really do think we're probably going to be looking at combinations of factors. There may be one central cause that the research will bear out, but from what we're hearing, there's so many different avenues that are being researched, whether we do know, like I said, neurological, but whether how much of that could be environmental, metabolic, structural. I think we're going to be finding out at some point that it's probably combinations of factors. Certain individuals may be born with a vulnerability, but we don't yet know what that vulnerability might be that might make one person more susceptible to having autism, given the same factors as another person who has similar
For instance, someone may have a genetic predisposition, but then put into an environment that they're in that may not trigger it or trigger the obvious ness of the disease, the disability itself, but all of a sudden they're put into an environment that suddenly triggers this
that may trigger. Right, and what we want to emphasize also is that it's not a parent factor that is contributing to the autism.
Oh, okay.
So, years ago, there was the notion of the refrigerator mothers, that it was the mom who was so cold and unloving, and that's why her child had autism. Unfortunately, that has been something that has really been disproven. But it is concerning, and it's natural, but we hear that quite often. That's often the first question that we hear from a parent is it something that I have done? And it is not something that the parent has done.
Have you had to dispel, or has the profession had to dispel a lot of those kinds of wives' tales?
I think so. I think for the parent, there's often, upon hearing that diagnosis, first of all, there's just that guilt and the shock, and just going back and trying to say, is it something that I did? But in the community in general, I think we're doing better as autism is being talked about more and more in the media, and you're just hearing it more, and and as the prevalence has increased, most people now are to a point where they know someone with autism, or at least they know someone who has autism. So I think we are moving forward in that way, but there are still a lot of misconceptions that are out there.
But as a result of that, then, it doesn't seem to me that it carries any more of the stigma that it used to.
I hope not. I think, sometimes for those of us who are really involved in the community, we get so immersed in it, and we forget that there are still, I think, a lot of misconceptions that are out there, and sometimes can be quite jarred by sometimes things that you may see in popular media or hear people saying that are concerning. But I hope that we're moving forward.
Does the popular media still sort of trivialize or just treat it superficially? They sound as if they really know what they're talking about, but they really don't. And that way doing more of a disservice than a service to explaining what autism really is.
And I think the biggest difficulty is the notion of the spectrum that you talked about earlier, that it is a wide range, and there can be such huge differences in how an individual may appear and function and learn. And I think what still exists in I think in some people's minds is the idea of autism as being the child who's completely nonverbal, who's doing a lot of stereotypic movements like hand flapping, which may be, one individual with autism and many individuals with autism.
Right.
So I think maybe that's where we still have a lot of work to do, is educating about the true range of the spectrum.
We have another caller. Caller, your question. Welcome to Little City TV.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening to you.
I have a son who has autism. He's in his early 20s. And I was just wondering if you knew of any events or anything this summer that one can participate in. I know he was in the Special Olympics a few years ago and did real well, but I haven't heard too many things about, any activities or anything. Do you have anything, is there anything available for him?
Well, I think the Park District is always a really good place to start, and they do some, depending on which Park District you're looking at. Sometimes they can get filled very quickly, but the Park District is a great place to start. The parent support groups are another great place to start in terms of finding out and to mention the group that I'm involved in. We're certainly not the only support group out there, but I do know that the Chicagoland Autism Connection does have a lot of recreational events throughout the entire year, and in August there is a pool party that's done, but there are other events that are done as well. So I would look at that website, chicagoautism.org. And again, some of the other agencies such as ARC of Illinois and Autism Speaks, to find out some other connections that you might. But I think the Park District is a great place to start.
He said his son is 21 years old. I just wonder, when was he diagnosed? At 21 years ago. The kinds of conversations that we're having about autism today certainly were not the kinds that they were having 21 years ago.
Yes.
And the programs were not there. And I just wonder, you just wonder where, if in fact, these young people at 21 years old and in adulthood now have lived this all their lives without perhaps the proper care.
And that does happen, right? We do diagnose some individuals quite late.
Well, the main purpose of our show, of course, is to increase autism awareness. What could you share with the general public that will enlighten or educate them regarding the spectrum that we talked about at the beginning of the show?
Well, I think just to remember that it is a spectrum, and to keep in mind the individual nature of it, I think are the two take-home messages that I would have.
We have we have about a minute left in our show. Unfortunately, time does fly. And but we would certainly like to have Dr. Theus, to come back at any time. This is a fascinating subject, one that's growing more fascinating every year as we become more and more ingrained into exploring autism and its many factors and the full spectrum of what autism is. And perhaps we can demystify this mysterious disorder. But this has been a wonderful conversation. I certainly hope that you viewers have gotten the best of the doctor's expertise and her knowledge. And we certainly invite you to come back next week when we have more discussion here on Little City TV. And always make sure that you give us a call. We're taking your calls here, and we'll see you next time right here on Little City TV.